Giridharadhari. Yasodanandana Bradajana Ranjana Yasodanand Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Giridharadhari Yasodanandana Bradajana Ranjana Yasoda Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Vishnu Paramahansa Bhavaraja Gacharya, also associated with AC Bhakti Vinoda Thakura Ki Jai, Namachara Haridasa Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Sakho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Mr. Gaur Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai, Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopina Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadip Dham Ki Jai, Gang Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Samavetta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai, Go Premanandi, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Bhrishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Paschachadeshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 5 Chapter 10 verse 11. Jivan Mritatva Niyamena Rajan Adyandavat Yad Vikritasya Drishtam Saswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Tar Hyuchyate Sau Vidikritya Yogaha. One. And Jiva Mrtattva, the quality of being dead while living. And Niyamena, by the laws of nature. Rajan, O King, Adi Antavat. Everything material has a beginning and an end. Yat, because Vikritasya, of things that are transformed, such as the body. Drishtam is seen. Swaswamya Bhavaha, the condition of servitude and mastership. Dhruva, unchangeable. Idya, O you who are worshipped. Yatra, wherein. Tarhi, then. Uchyate, it is said. Asau, that. Vidi Kritya Yoga, fitness of order and duty. Translation, my dear king, you have unnecessarily accused me of being dead though alive. In this regard, I can only say that this is the case everywhere, because everything material has its beginning and end. As far as you are thinking that you are the king and master and are thus trying to order me, this is also incorrect because these positions are temporary. Today you are a king and I am your servant, but tomorrow the position may be changed. And you may be my servant and I your master. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. Purport: the bodily conception is the basic principle of suffering and material existence. In Kali Yuga especially, people are so uneducated that they cannot even understand that the body is changing at every moment and that the ultimate change is called death. In this life, one may be a king, and in the next life, one may be a dog, according to karma. The spirit soul, is in a deep slumber caused by the force of material nature. He is put in one type of condition and again changed into another type. Without self-realization and knowledge, conditional life continues, and one falsely claims himself a king, a servant, a cat, or a dog. These are simply different transformations brought about by the supreme arrangement. One should not be misled by such temporary bodily conceptions. Actually, no one is master within the material world, for everyone is under the control of material nature, which is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the ultimate master. As explained in Caitanya Charitamrita, Ekale Ishvara Krishna ar sabritya. The only master is Krishna and everyone else is his servant. Forgetfulness of our relationship with the Supreme Lord brings about our suffering in the material world. Translation, my dear king, you have unnecessarily accused me of being dead though alive. In this regard, I can only say that this is the case everywhere because everything material has its beginning and end. As far as you're thinking you are the king and master and are thus trying to order me, this is also incorrect because these positions are temporary. Today you are a king and I am your servant, but tomorrow the position may be changed. And you may be my servant and I your master. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. So again, Jad Bharat is explaining to the king the error based upon our identity with our body and ignorance of our position as the soul. We are under the, covered up. Often the term is used, the covering on the soul is the subtle body and the gross body. And this covering creates an obstruction in the form of ignorance. And in that subtle body we have the root cause, which is ahankara. And if we examine ahankara, we see this is a very subtle material element that manifests from prakriti after mahatattva. So when Mahavishnu glances over prakriti, which is invisible and undetectable, then suddenly it transforms into mahatattva, which becomes visible and glowing, and it's sometimes described as a big golden egg because of the jiva gets injected and the consciousness of the jiva creates light within the mahatattva. But that form of mahatattva is so subtle that it doesn't really, very little, it obstructs the jiva very little, so therefore the consciousness of the jiva parades that mahatattva and it glows. So it's a very fine form of matter with the jiva in it, but very, very subtle and almost spiritual, you can say, because of the consciousness of the jiva is quite evident. But that disturbance again, which is in sattva gun basically, begins to mutate. It starts evolving or digressing or degrading, and from sattva gun it goes to rajagun, which is called sutra, and from sutra or rajagun it goes into tamagun, and that is called ahankara. So from mahatattva we get into ahankara, and then ahankara is the ignorance. So mahatattva was sattvic and it was glowing. When we get to ahankara, this is where the covering really takes place within prakriti. The mode of ignorance becomes prominent. And then this covers up the jiva. And then ahankara evolves into gross material elements. And then tanmatras, sense objects, and senses, eyes, ears, etc., and sense devatas, and mind, and intelligence, all this comes out. And these are further coverings, subtle and gross, on the jiva. So in this way, gradually, as prakriti evolves with the jiva in it, the jiva becomes more and more covered by ignorance in the form of ahankara, subtle body, and gross body. And in that state, the jiva identifies with the body. not with the Atma. So that basic mistake is the cause of everything else that comes afterwards. Once the jiva identifies with the material body, then he perceives in terms of the material body, and he does actions in terms of the material body, and he enjoys, he tries to get happiness in terms of the material body. So all this arises from this basic error of identifying with the material body. And of course, all the jivas that come into the material world when Brahma creates the material world, they are not innocent. They are affected by previous karmas. So therefore, they're destined to take a body already once they're within Prakriti, ejected by Mahavishnu into Prakriti, and then it evolves into nama-tattva, etc. So the jivas are not innocent. Their destiny is already determined by previous actions. What type of body they're going to get, what type of desires they have. So according to that karma then, the jivas get bodies. Brahma creates bodies and lokas, different levels, and then he sticks those jivas in the bodies in certain levels within the material world, from Brahma Loka down to Patala Loka, in terms of animal, plant, human, devata, etc. According to karma. But in all the bodies, the jiva is thinking, I am the body and I should enjoy something with my body. Because if you think your body, you think you are the body, then you want to use the body. It's my hand, my foot, my eye, whatever. I have to see, I perceive things, I taste things, I hear things, I enjoy things. So we use the body to enjoy in the material world. And so all of this is under this ignorance, which is manifest as ahankara, etc., as we go down into the material world. Once that is, of course, it's eternally established in one sense, because you come with your karmas already. So it's already, even when you're in Mahavishnu with no material bodies, already you still got your karmas waiting for you from previous lifetimes. So the conditioning, as we can say, is already waiting for you. So when you come in, everything is already there from previous creation and previous creation and previous creation. So it's an endless cycle of ignorance. And it's difficult to get out, because it's so long. It goes on for lifetimes of Brahma, one after the other. And we were habituated with identification with the material body and enjoying in the material world. So this is a problem. So how to get out of that? Of course, most people don't want to get out. Animals do not strive to get out of their body and out of their material identity. They just live and die. Finished. And plants the same. But when you come to the human being, there is a chance. But even in human beings, the majority are also in ignorance. So we see a varnashram system with Brahmins, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras. Most of the population is Sudra, maybe 85, 90%. Then we have maybe 7% Vaishya and 2% Kshatriya, 1% Brahmana, like this. So the amount of human beings, the percentages, makes tamasic also. So they identify strongly with their material bodies, and in that body they are trying to get their happiness or their enjoyment. So when we talk about sense gratification, this means we identify with the body and we're trying to use our body for enjoyment. Naturally, because it's what the body does. It tries to get enjoyment. So that's the problem of the human being. Most people are in that ignorance, and then therefore they'll just live and die like the animals. However, the scripture is a little optimistic, and it says, okay, you got to get out of the situation, accept the varnashram system, accept scripture. Even if you're stuck in the material world, at least follow some rules and regulations. And so you follow varnashram, and then you're civilized. And then through that system, gradually you elevate yourself to sattva guna, and when you're in sattva guna, and then you realize, oh, I'm not the body. And we accept the scriptures, and then we start practicing jnana yoga, stanga yoga, and bhakti yoga. So that's basically the whole strategy of Krishna and producing scriptures and establishing a varnashram system. So you can gradually purify. Right? The jivas are, as I said, kind of helplessly stuck in this position in the material world, and they're so conditioned. It's very, very difficult to get out of that conditioning. And even if you tell them something, they'll ignore it because they're in ignorance. They don't want to learn anything. And even if we want to, for some reason, learn something, still, the habit is so strong, and it's very, very difficult to overcome because it's a conditioning. Once it's established, we get lazy and we don't want to change it. The nature of a habit is it's an easy route for us to follow. Once we have a habit, and then it's easy. You don't have to think about it too much. You just do it. So the whole ignorance and identification with the body and trying to enjoy with the material body, that's a habit. And once that's established, life after life after life, very difficult to change because it's easy to do. You just fit into the mold and do whatever you have to do like that. So it doesn't mean that we cannot change it. It can be changed. Habits can be changed, as we know. If we have bad habits or whatever, we can change them. But usually it takes a lot of effort. Because it takes a lot of effort, we're lazy. So we don't want to put the effort into changing. So therefore we don't change. So that's the problem. But of course Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, if you practice, then you can control the mind. But most of us don't want to practice because we have the habit of letting the mind do whatever it wants. So change is possible, but you got to want to change, and then you have to put effort into it. So that's basically, if you can do that, and then you can actually do something, elevate yourself in this material world. If you don't want to change and you don't want to put any effort, then nothing happens. So that's what tamagun is for the human being. If we're in the Sudra level, we don't want to change, we don't want to do anything, we're a bit lazy. So we're rather helpless. So if there is no systematic method for elevation, humanity is lost. So we have to have some systematic method of elevating people in tamagun. So that's why they have rules for Sudras, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmanas, so they can elevate. And if you follow those rules, fine. And then you start elevating. And then somebody enforces the rule, the Kshatriya. So that is the system for the helpless people in general. However, Krishna says, Sarva Dhamman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Forget about all this. After he teaches Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Stanga Yoga, he says, forget about it, even though it's in the scripture. So it's a valid process if the conditions are suitable, and we do have a nice king and a nice varnashram system set up nicely, then we can do that. And you can gradually elevate yourself through that process. So that's one way you can advance, through gradual process of Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Stanga Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. But particularly in Kali Yuga, Krishna is recommending forget about all that and just surrender unto me and perform Bhakti Yoga. And the reason is that in Kali Yuga, we don't have much of a system left to elevate people. A varnashram system is not working properly. We have no king. So it is difficult to implement. It's explained in the Bhagavatam that actually the last descendant of Manu should be the king. Manu establishes a reign of kings that lasts for 71 yuga cycles. And then that dynasty disappears, and then another one appears, and then he establishes another line of kings. So we have Vaivasvata Manu, who established a reign, who was previously Satyavrata, that king who was in the flood and whatever like that, and then he became the Manu of this particular cycle, Manvantara period. And his dynasty has continued for 28 yuga cycles so far. And the lines of kings are listed in the 9th canto of Bhagavatam. A lot of it, 8th and 9th canto of Bhagavatam, a lot of the list of descendants of Manu are there. In 8th canto, there's the story of Matsya, and then after that we have Satyavrata, and then Satyavrata establishes the whole line of kings. And so in our Vaivasvata Manvantara period, comes down, and finally we get all these different things in Kali Yuga with the Yadu dynasty and the Kurus, etc. And then after that, there's a description of how everything declined, and this king assassinated that king, and this it becomes a big mess shortly after the disappearance of Krishna. And then it says that finally the last descendant of Manu walked off to the Himalayas. And he won't manifest himself until the next Satya Yuga. So then where's the authority to establish the Varnashram system with the king in Kali Yuga? Because he's gone, he's not there anymore. So it's very, very difficult to really have an effective system because he's not there. And he won't manifest until the Satya Yuga. When Satya Yuga comes, he manifests himself and they establish a system. Therefore, the Varnashram system also is very difficult to implement without the proper king. So that gradual system, therefore, is disrupted because the basis of the gradual system is elevation from the tamogun to sattvagun, and that's not there. So therefore, no one can practice the higher principles of jnana and yoga, etc., because it requires sattvagun. So anyway, that's one reason why Krishna recommends, okay, forget about all of this, not because it's useless, but it's not practical in Kali Yuga. So therefore, you should simply take to the process of bhakti. So that is the other method. Instead of gradually going through all of the different processes from karma yoga to jnana yoga to astanga yoga and then bhakti yoga, the other process is just take to bhakti yoga, which can be done anytime. But particularly in Kali Yuga, we don't have much of a choice. So therefore, just do bhakti yoga. He says, and reject everything else because it's not going to work. So the why bhakti can be done without that whole gradual system is because bhakti is very powerful. And it invokes the mercy of the Supreme Lord, who creates the Varnashram system, creates jnana, and creates yoga also. So he is all-powerful, and within bhakti he has all of his Shakti. All Shakti is within because it's non-different from Krishna. In the other processes, they're not non-different from Krishna, only in a vague sense. Like we say the Vedas are non-different, Karma Kanda is non-different from Krishna, but material world is non-different from Krishna, but also there is a big distinction. But the bhakti and Krishna are very similar because it's his Sarup Shakti, his internal energy is bhakti. We can't say that about jnana, but that's sattvagun. And karma yoga is rajagun, tamagun. So it's not actually one with the Lord exactly. It's one because it's his process, but it's not the same as the Lord. But bhakti is non-different from the Lord. It's nirguna, beyond the material world. So a very special process. So therefore, even if we don't have this gradual progression through the gunas, we can practice bhakti yoga. Anyone can practice bhakti yoga. And through that process, we transcend the gunas, which is the whole purpose of the Varnashram system and jnana yoga, to transcend the gunas. So we can just accomplish that by bhakti alone. Therefore, Krishna recommends the process of bhakti in Kali Yuga. But if you look in that chapter 18 of Bhagavad Gita, then Krishna also says, yes, you do bhakti yoga, ignore everything else. But then he says, don't teach this knowledge, Bhagavad Gita, to people with no faith, people who are envious. So, who has faith in Kali Yuga? Who's not envious? Who's not materialistic? Everybody is. So then we say, well, then this whole process of ignoring everything else and just doing bhakti yoga, it's not going to be Effective because nobody's qualified. We have to look for a person with faith and without envy and non-materialistic, and we can't find anybody in Kali Yuga like that. Huh? So that's true. It's a good objection. The answer to that objection, or the response to that objection is that though it is so, nobody is qualified, still the Supreme Lord is very merciful, and he manifests himself in Kali Yuga as the Yuga avatar to uplift everybody through the process of bhakti. So therefore, though people are unqualified, the Lord gives us a method by which we can uplift ourselves, and that method is introduced by Caitanya Mahaprabhu, and that is Nam Sankirtan. So this is the way in which the population can uplift themselves, even if they don't have faith. Of course, we can say, don't preach to the faithless persons. The glories of the holy name, that's also there. And it's no offense if you preach to the faithless. So the solution to that is that we may not preach to them, but we can let them hear the holy name. So for the faithless people, that's the first preaching. Just expose them to the holy name. And if they're exposed enough, they get faith. If they get faith, then we can do the preaching, to give them knowledge. So 2 steps are there. Exposure, and then gradually they get faith, and then when they're receptive, then we can give them the knowledge. So that's the general process for uplifting everybody in Kali Yuga. So though it looks like it's a hopeless case because everybody's in ignorance and everybody's attached to the material world, through the process of Sankirtan, and gradually people can change and advance in spiritual life without having to go through all these other processes of karma yoga, jnana yoga, and astanga yoga, just through the process of bhakti. So that's the solution that is given by the Supreme Lord. So through the process of bhakti, then all of this problem indicated here in these verses, the identification with the material body and the ahankara and all the problems that result from that, thinking you're a king or whatever, or I control you or you control me, etc. All of that is removed. First, by knowledge. We get the knowledge you're not the body or the soul, the jnana aspect of it, or sambandha jnana. And then with realization. So as we get the knowledge and then we practice bhakti, then we will realize that we are the soul, we're not the body. So that automatically happens with the process of bhakti. So it's not a separate endeavor. If we are attracted to jnana yoga, then it becomes a separate endeavor, simply to establish I am not the body, I am the soul, and to realize that. That is the process of jnana yoga, which is basically sattvic in nature. But the process of bhakti, this happens without any separate sadhana. We don't have to do jnana yoga, we just do bhakti. Then you can realize I'm not the body, I'm the soul. But, as I said, this is secondary result. This is a secondary aspect of bhakti. It's not what we're so much interested in. Rather, we're interested in establishing our relationship with Krishna. And by establishing the relationship with Krishna, automatically this type of jnana, I'm not the body, I'm the soul, will also result. How does it result? Because with the practice of bhakti, the essential faith there is I am the eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. I'm not the body, I am the soul, and Krishna is a supreme spiritual form. And I'm just a servant of him, spiritual form who's servant of him. So this will negate the idea that I am a separate enjoyer and I should enjoy with the material body. It's the opposite. So therefore, the simple practice of bhakti will negate all of this automatically. But not only negates it, I'm not the body, it also establishes I am the servant of Krishna. So that's a higher principle as well. So that one aspect, I am the servant of Krishna, that will negate this, plus it establishes a new principle, that we're all dedicated to serving Krishna. So therefore, whatever is accomplished in Gyan is automatically accomplished in Bhakti as a secondary result. And the main result is we establish our relationship with Krishna in unconditional love. Okay, any question?
Maharaj, there's a word in the word for word, dhruvaha, unchangeable. Can you explain how that fits into Srila Prabhupada's translation, please?
Dhruvaha, dhruva. This is I think it means here, it is connected with this idea swaswamya bhava, the condition of servitude and mastership. So we're convinced that this is the position, unchangeable position. I think I'm the master, you're the servant. But it's actually not true, and then sooner or later it's the opposite. So then that sense, the dhruva is, we're very convinced that this is how it is. So it's our subjective idea that this is unchangeable. I'm eternally the master and you're eternally the servant.
Maharaj, I just wonder sometimes how the false ego even allows us to be Krishna conscious or to think of Krishna, because...
It doesn't. We have the 10th offense, aham mama, that we're very attached to I and mine, and that if this is very strong, then we cannot progress in bhakti. So that I and mine is actually just a reflection of that false ego. And where does the false ego come from? Ultimately, why do we get false ego in the first place? Is because we have this desire to be independent, not recognize that we're the servant of Krishna, and think we're the enjoyer. That gives rise to the ahankara with identity with the body, and then we think of I and mine in terms of a body. So all of that is opposite of bhakti, because instead of saying I serve Krishna, it's I get served. I am the enjoyer. In bhakti, Krishna is the enjoyer. I want to please Krishna. But here, I want to be the object of love. I want to be the object of service. That is basically aham, mama, I and mine, and false ego, and all the acts we do in this material world are governed by that. So it's it takes us in the opposite direction. Also in the Bhagavatam it says that, gives the example that if you are some object going one direction, let's say it's going west, a little dog is walking west or running west, and you're trying to catch the dog. So it's logical that if you want to catch the dog going west, you also have to go west. And if you go in the opposite direction, you're not going to catch the dog. So if we want to get Krishna, we have to go this direction, but people want to go in the opposite direction, that is towards a false ego and me and mine, etc. That's the opposite direction. So if you can't go in both directions at once. If you want Krishna, you go in this direction, you surrender your false ego and your possessiveness and all that, and agree to be the servant of Krishna. And if you're trying to cultivate simultaneous, the opposite, you're not going to go anywhere. You won't catch Krishna that way.
Yeah, then how is it that we're even able to chant Hare Krishna, because we do have false ego and we are under the false ego?
Well, though we do have false ego, we still have some ignorance, we still have anarthas, etc. The qualification for bhakti is shraddha, or faith. So we do have a little conviction somewhere, a little sympathy for Krishna, a little sympathy for understanding, yes, I shouldn't enjoy on my independently. I should actually establish a loving relationship with Krishna and offer Krishna something in affection, and that's the perfection of life. And so in the beginning, it's a little inclination of the soul to do that. It's not perfect, but it's a little inclination, and this allows us to start the process of bhakti in spite of all of our anarthas and ignorance and everything that's there. So that's the mercy of Krishna, that he allows us to start the process with that little bit of inclination and conviction in Krishna. And then when we practice the bhakti, then the faith becomes stronger and the anarthas decrease and attraction for Krishna increases until the anarthas become sufficiently decreased, and we call that nishta, and you can practice steadily. Before that it's unsteady. And then beyond that, the attraction to Krishna becomes stronger and stronger. The anarthas and the false ego get weaker and weaker. Then we call that ruci, positive taste. And that becomes stronger. It becomes attachment to Krishna. And we can't give up the process of bhakti at all. And the anarthas are almost gone completely at that point. And then we get to bhava, and Krishna reveals himself. Still, there's a little anartha there. But in the bhava stage, then finally that ahankara is completely dissipated. And all the karmas are gone, everything is gone at that stage. Through the actions of bhakti and that faith that we have in a conviction in trying to please Krishna.
Thank you.
You mentioned that Krishna told Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita that this instruction shall not be given to anyone who is envious.
Mm-hmm.
So now in our preaching, when do we know that people are ready so that we can give them more? Because obviously maybe you will answer that when they have developed faith, but how do we judge?
Well, of course, one is that maybe just the way they act. So the devotee walks down the street, and then some people are going to turn away and walk in the opposite direction. We know that they're probably not very interested. They want to avoid you. So we just say, okay. Other people may just stand there and look at you rather hostilely or something. Even those people, we look at their face and they're not too interested. Other people are a little curious. No, who is that? Maybe it's interesting. So that means they are a little bit sympathetic. And there's other people who are saying, they recognize a devotee and they want to speak to him. So we have to use our perception, our intelligence a little to see the initial position of these people. Are they completely unfavorable, a little unfavorable, neutral, a little favorable, more favorable, or whatever? Of course, we don't know sometimes what's in a person or just there. And then we have to speak to them. By speaking to them again, we can understand a little bit about just where they are in the gunas, whether they're real tamagun with no faith, whether they're tamagun with a little faith, or whether they're in sattvagun with faith, or they're sattvagun with no faith, Because you may have some people who are kind of into spiritually, but when they talk about, okay, Krishna's got a form, then we don't want that. So they're more or less sattvagun impersonalists. or Buddhists or something like that, And then you have sattvagun, they're kind of neutral, but they're interested. So those are the people probably you can take. But even the person in ignorance, he may have all bad habits, but he has a little attraction somehow or other, a little interest. Those are also people that have a little faith. So we can take all those people that have a little faith and then cultivate that, no matter what their gunas are. So observation and then talking to them, probably we can figure out where they're at. And then based on that, then we can say something to them and see their response to that. And based on that, we can understand something further about them.
How can you use faith or bhakti yoga to achieve certain materialistic goals or visions if in the outer world, in the modern world, people want to use it?
Yeah, well, you can do that. Of course, we don't encourage that because it's not pure bhakti. But bhakti and chanting the holy name is called chantamani, non-different from Krishna. And chantamani is a special stone. You have that stone, and whatever you wish for, you achieve. Like a desire tree. You go to the desire tree, ask for something, then the tree manifests that thing, whatever it is, car, house, money, jewels, or whatever, marriage, family, all that can come out of the desire tree or the chantamani. So Krishna is like that also. You can approach Krishna for material things, and you pray to him, and you can get them. As Balaji, people go to Balaji, and they get all sorts of material assets and Balaji. But of course, for the person practicing pure bhakti, we don't really want those material things, because that's another impediment. We get attached to those things. We just want prema, love of Krishna. That's all we want. So we try to avoid those things, but you can get those things from bhakti. And Krishna can also supply those things without your asking for them, if it's necessary for your service or whatever. or for your maintenance. He can also supply those things. But we try, in pure bhakti, we try to avoid those things. But definitely, whatever you can get by doing anything else in the material world, strong endeavors, intelligence, or worshipping devatas, or doing vows and vratas to different devatas, you can get that from Krishna also. But the person who's practicing pure bhakti, he doesn't aspire for those things because they're all temporary. Rather, we aspire for the ultimate goal, which is eternal and gives the most bliss.
Maharaj, you mentioned that to establish the varnashram system, we need the king. So currently, the king who is ran
Not there,
away,
he's hiding.
Yeah, he's not going to come till the next Satyuga. And at the same time, we hear the instruction of Srila Prabhupada that he intend to establish varnashram system.
Yeah, yeah.
And we can see ashram system is there to some degree.
Yeah.
But varna and the entire varnashram system is very difficult, as you're saying. So
Yeah.
how can we understand Srila Prabhupada's instruction?
Well, this is controversial. Devotees have various opinions about that, and we can't really say because nobody got any confirmation from Srila Prabhupada. Of course, some say it's only for ISKCON, that means. Others say it's for the whole society. So we have two extremely different ideas there working. So, but as for whole society, that's quite difficult. And to do that, you have specialized persons, which is kind of beyond, it's going to distract us from bhakti if we try that, become politicians or something and whatever. So that's quite a difficult task. The more immediate task is to establish some sort of varnashram within ISKCON. But then again, we do have some problems because we can't follow Manu Samhita varnashram, because that's largely also a birth-based thing, and then we're against varnas by birth. So there's another problem there. So we have to have a modified type of varnashram system where it's not based upon birth. Maybe we can call that the Daiva varnashram system. But to establish that again requires a lot of investigation and practice and to see what works, because nobody's established such a system before that in the modern world that works. And since we don't have the king, who replaces the king in our system, even if it's within the ISKCON, not within the whole world, or within the whole society, who governs that system? So then that's another problem. How do we have who's the king within that system of our mini varnashram, Daiva varnashram within ISKCON? So there's a lot of problems there that have not been worked out really. But ashram is not so difficult because people naturally go through different stages by age anyway. And then there is, in the material world also, we have a system reflecting that. We have educational systems, and then we have family life and retirement and whatever. So there's kind of a natural progression. So that's not so difficult to establish. And traditionally, however, the ashrams are very much linked to the varnas. So the sudras don't have any of that. No brahmachari life, only grihastha life. No vanaprastha, no sannyas. And the Vaishyas and Kshatriyas get up to brahmachari, grihastha, and vanaprastha. And then the Brahmins, they get up from brahmachari all the way to sannyas. So that's the traditional system, but then probably we won't want to implement that also within ISKCON. So the Varna aspect is a little more difficult to apply, and it's also somewhat changeable because people may change their occupations throughout life. So then that also becomes a little problematic because in the Varnashram system, everything is like, it's not just lifetime, it's for generations you're in the same Varna. The goldsmith is the goldsmith for 20 generations back, or the farmer is the farmer for 20 generations back, or the Brahman's a Brahmana for 20 generations back. But if we're going to keep changing people around, then it's a little bit different system. Whole family system is different. So those things have to be worked out, and I don't know if anyone's thought about that too much, but a little difficult to apply that system because it's quite different from the traditional Varnashram system, whatever it is.
Maharaj, we were talking about false ego. Sometimes it feels that the false ego, or when we observe, the false ego doesn't really change over a period of, throughout the time. At the most, the person sort of loses his abilities, and that way he gets little mellow. And is this right? Like the false ego does not transform over a lifetime, or every lifetime a person gets a different false ego?
Well, the subtle body goes with the jiva birth after birth after birth after birth. So it's not just the false ego. Your desires go with you, and your karmas go with you, and all your future karmas go with you that are for next life and next life and next life. They're all stuck on your subtle body. And they will all go with you birth after birth. So in there we also have the ahankara, the mind, intelligence like that. They are somewhat changeable. So in other words, by choosing to act in a certain way in this lifetime, you can change your karmas in general and become sattvic and elevate yourself in life and go to svargaloka. So you can go from tamagun to sattvagun by choice of action, etc. So, and then your desires also constantly change. So you can change things. It takes a little time, of course, but you can start changing your subtle body and your mind and your intelligence, and your ahankara can gradually change, but it's usually not a sudden change. Modifies gradually, but of course it's all material. And if you go beyond sattvagun, then there's no more ahankara. So basically ahankara is that identity within the gunas, with the material body. If you transcend the gunas, then you're free from ahankara and everything. So that's automatically achieved through bhakti. All the modifications of your ahankara, identifying as yourself as a human or as a monkey or an animal or a plant or whatever, all that is modification of ahankara, but basically it's all material identity. And it can change, and it does change birth after birth, but as a human being, we can go from tamagun to sattvagun, and our ahankara can change like that, but still it's bondage. So to get out of that, then we have to practice bhakti. And if we realize Krishna and Baba, then ahankara is gone. We no longer identify with the body, we're identifying ourselves as a servant of Krishna, and we get a spiritual body.
Just another question on that. The affection or the compassion that we see in the world, it's also a product of false identification.
Sattvic. Generally sattvic.
So, and us coming to or identifying or us coming to Krishna is also begins with based on the false identification.
No, well, faith is not to do with the gunas at all.
But
in other words, it's nirguna.
4 kinds of people come to Krishna.
Yeah. So they do have their material desires. In other words, nobody is pure when they come to Krishna.
Yeah.
But the faith itself, the idea that we do accept Krishna and we want to worship him, that is nirguna. So that comes from mercy of devotees. It doesn't come from, it's not generated from the gunas. Generated from mercy of devotees, and the mercy of devotees comes from Krishna himself, so that's spiritual.
What's the first step of chanting? How do you feel that change?
What's the first step in chanting, or the first effect of chanting?
Change, as you said, change.
Oh, the
change
first
your mind
change.
or control your mind. What's the first step in change, and how do you feel that change?
In what? Change in?
Change in your mind, change
when we do bhakti?
your mind or fight, yes.
When we do bhakti.
Yes.
So if we develop that faith, then we have a conviction in, there's a supreme entity, a supreme person there who's all loving and all attractive, that we don't want to enjoy separately, we want to serve him and try to please him, which means ultimately we want to establish a real, true, loving relationship with no conditions. Unconditional love with Krishna. So it's a little bit theoretical, we can say, but we have a voluntary willingness to try out the process and see if it works. So different people will have different effects, obviously, because they have different levels of obstruction, etc. But we start the process, then one of the effects is destruction of miseries. That the anxieties and all the worries that we have begin to dissipate because if we're concentrating on a spiritual entity and we're, as a spiritual person, we're establishing that relationship, then all of these worries and stuff belong to the material level, they start disappearing. And so we become more peaceful. Miseries are destroyed and pieces become more peaceful. And then we also experience spiritual satisfaction. And we don't call it bliss at this stage, that's the highest stage. But at the very beginning we have a spiritual satisfaction. That means the Atma, or the soul itself, is a little satisfied at this point because of establishing this relationship of love with Krishna, even though it's not perfect. But we get some satisfaction from that. So we get a little satisfaction, which is a reflection of bliss, and we get relief from our suffering condition and our anxieties, etc. Those are generally the first symptoms. Okay, Hare Krishna.